Okay, welcome everyone to Daf Yomi Shekalim, 1 week at a time. This is very exciting. Today we are going to be completing Masechet Shekalim. So first of all, congratulations to everyone who has completed this Masechet, and we will celebrate at the end of today's class. It was a very short Masechet, but I think it was a very dense Masechet. There was a lot here, a lot of details. I think the pages were were quite long. So really, congratulations to everyone, and um, and I think let's get started. Today we're going to do Daf 17 through 22. As I said, we're going to finish the Masechet together. And at the end, I'm going to give you a brief introduction for the next Masechet, the next Masechet being Masechet Yoma. And we'll talk more about that in a little bit. Okay, let's go to Daf 17. And in Daf 17, we have the Gemara, first the Mishnah tells us that there are 13 places where it was customary to bow down in the temple. So I'm going to, I think I'm going, let me share this first with you. Here is a picture of what the temple looked like, just to get an idea of directions. The bottom right corner is the east side of is the east, and I would say if right the temple went east to west, so that like I guess top left corner or like on the diagonal, that is the west side. And then again on your right is the north, and on your left is the south. So when one entered the temple mount, this whole area is the temple mount. But when one entered the temple, one entered this first area here on the again towards the bottom right or the center of the bottom here. That's called the women's courtyard, and then went up these 15 stairs. Can you see my cursor? Can you see it moving or not? Or no? Okay. So right here, and basically, really in the center of this picture is a gate, which we'll talk about in a minute, called the Gate of Nicanor. And then when you got into the main area, this is the temple courtyard, and the big building that you see here. This is the second temple. This very large building is the sanctuary, which again we'll talk more about in a little bit. So here you really have an idea of what it looked like. We're going to talk about if you can look around the edges of the structure, you can see entranceways or gates. We're going to talk about that right now. I'll just show you one more picture. Here is a like an idea of the structure. Now, if you can read Hebrew, this is easy for you. Unfortunately, I love this picture. The problem is the top of the picture is the south and the bottom is the north. So that bothers me. So I'm actually going to flip this picture around. Sorry. But this is just so you understand, going from right to left, we're going from east to west. Again, north being on top and south being on the bottom. This just gives you a feeling of what it was like when one entered the Temple Mount, first of all, and specifically when one walked towards the temple courtyard. So if you can see around the edges are is the chel. The chel was the wall that's in brown, and the black is the soreg. We're going to talk about that right now. So here is just the picture. And now I'm just going to go back to, again, Daf HaChaim, who helps us, again, visualize it. Sorry, I just want to take a break for 1 minute to dedicate our lesson today in memory of all the fallen soldiers of Israel. Tonight we started here in Israel Yom HaZikaron, the Remembrance Day for the fallen soldiers of Israel, and therefore I would like to dedicate our class in their memory. Okay, let's go back, and here you can see again. This is how do you say skizza? Sorry, a picture of the temple. Yes, we are on Daf 17, and the Mishnah says that there are 13 places that was customary for people to bow down when they would pass these areas. What are these areas? Opinion number one is that they are the gates. Again, you can see here there are gates on every side, 4 on the north, 4 on the south, 3 on the east, and 2 on the west. That is opinion number one. Opinion number two is really um, there were not 13 gates. There were really only 7 gates. Rather, what are these 13 times that they would bow down? They were actually breaches in the outer wall of the temple. And the Gemara explains that the Greeks, when they were conquering the temple, they destroyed the fence around the wall around the temple in 13 different areas. But the Hashmonaim, the Hasmoneans, when they came to rebuild the temple, they closed up these breaches. And therefore, in order to commemorate this great miracle of winning, right, the Greeks, the people would bow down in these 13 areas when they would pass them, when they were on the Temple Mount. And since we were talking about the temple. So the Gemara on Daf 17 continues with a beautiful description about what is going to happen in the end of days in the temple, and a beautiful idea. It says in the later prophets, specifically in Zechariah, and then also in Yechezkel, that a spring of water will come forth from within the temple, actually exactly where the Aron, the ark, stood, where we talked about that last week. And the Gemara beautifully describes how at first it's going to be this very thin trickling of water, and it's going to build up and build up and build up and build up till it goes all the way out to the Mediterranean Sea and to the Dead Sea and to the Kinneret, to the Kinneret. So the Gemara describes on 17 what this is going to be like, and how the water is going to flow throughout the land from Jerusalem. And I think it's very important for those of you who have visited Jerusalem or Israel in general, there is not a lot of water. So the idea that in the end of days there will be so much water that it's going to be flowing out of the temple is really a beautiful concept and something that we can really appreciate here in Jerusalem. The Gemara continues and talks about fruit trees that are going to grow along the banks of this new river, and how it's going to produce produce much quicker. Thank you for Sea of Galilee, the Kinneret. Thank you, Sea of Galilee. And the Gemara talks about the fruit trees and the grain bearing fruit much quicker than we're normally used to, either maybe once a month, once every 15 days. But the idea is, again, an abundance of water, which leads to an abundance of produce as well. The next Mishnah on 17 talks about the table, the shulchan in the temple, and says and says that there were numerous shulchanot, tables, in the temple. And here you can see a picture again. The Mishnah says that they were 8 marble tables. That's here on the right. This is in front of, again, north of the area. Here you could see at the bottom is the altar. Above, or to the right in this picture, or to the north, is the area where they slaughtered the animals. And above that, again to the right in this picture, are 8 marble tables where they would butcher the sacrifices. The Mishnah on 17 continues and says that there were 2 tables here on the side of the altar, that would be on the left, one of marble and one of silver, or maybe one of gold. And this again was a place, one of marble and one of silver. This was for limbs of the sacrifices that were going to go onto the altar. And it was a place to put the utensils that were going to be used throughout the service in the temple. Then, as you can see this arrow right in the middle, there were 2 tables right in the entranceway, in the antechamber of the sanctuary, one of marble and one of gold. And this is where they would put the showbread, the lechem hapanim, on its way as it was going to be put on the actual shulchan, the table, which we're going to talk about in a minute, the golden table that was within the temple. So this was a place where they put it when they were bringing it in, and a place where they were going to put it on its way out. And the Gemara describes how this transferring was done on Shabbat, and new loaves were put in and the old loaves were taken out immediately. And the Gemara talks about the miracle in the temple. There were many miracles, but one of them was that the showbread, the lechem hapanim, was warm when it was put on the table, on the golden table, the shulchan, and it was just as warm when they took it off a week later on Shabbat. So the idea that that it was warm, can you imagine, right? Warm bread all week long. That was one of the miracles in the temple. And the Gemara then talks about the golden table, the shulchan that we're familiar with. If you look here towards the back of this picture, that is the original golden table, the shulchan, where they put the showbread. If you can see here, it had a very unique shape. Remember last week we talked about the family that knew how to make this special bread. Interestingly enough, what you see in the foreground is not something that many people know about, which is the Gemara says that at the top of the bottom of 17 going on to 18, that Shlomo HaMelech, King Solomon, we know that his kingdom was very wealthy. He actually built 10 other golden tables to show the affluence of the Jewish people. There's a machloket, there's a disagreement if there was bread put on every one of these tables, or, as you can see here in this picture, the bread was only put on the original table, and the other tables were really just there to show. The Gemara here asks at the top of 18, were the tables, as we can see here, 5 and 5? Was it 10 along the northern edge? Was it 10 that went north to south? There's a disagreement on exactly how it looked. The Gemara continues and says not only were there 10 tables, but there were actually 10 candelabrums, 10 menorot as well. And the same idea, the main menorah, the main candelabrum that was lit by the high priest, by the Kohen Gadol, plus 10 other ones. And the same idea, how did they stand, north to south or east to west? The Gemara continues, and here, just so you see what it looked like when they laid out what it looked like in the sanctuary. The sanctuary was separated into 2 parts. You can see here they opened the curtains in this picture, but you should just know that the curtains were not really opened. The high priest would walk through them on Yom Kippur, but generally it was closed. But you can see here in the center and the back is the Aron, the ark. On the right we have the showbread, the shulchan. On the left we have the menorah, the candelabrum. In the center and the front is the golden altar, the altar where they put the incense, the ktoret. So just to give you an idea of what it looked like. Here is just another schematic, as I mentioned, right? It could be that the 10 tables were along the northern wall, and again, the 10 candelabras were along the southern wall. And the Gemara teaches us that the front half of the sanctuary was actually empty. I guess also, if you think about it architecturally, when you walked in, again, you walked in from the east. It's much more grand to walk into, right? It's empty in the beginning, and then you see all the furnishings or the kelim, the utensils in the back. So this is basically what it looked like. So from here on Daf 18 on Yud Chet, the Gemara continues, and since we are in Masechet Shekalim, if you remember, we discussed that there were 13 collection boxes. Again, here, this is from Style Daf from Rabbi Farber. He made them look like a shofar, but again, as we mentioned, they really are collection boxes. And each one had a different purpose. So let's just go through each one. The Mishnah on 18 tells us the first one was for new shkalim. Remember, the ones that were just, this is also a good review for us, the ones that were collected this year. The next one is for the old shkalim. Remember, after they took out from the new shkalim, they would then be able to put it into the old shkalim that was used for other things. The next one was for kinin. Kinin are the birds. They're used to purchase the birds for sacrifices. The Gemara is later going to tell us that these sacrifices are voluntary sacrifices. They were given as a nidava, as a donation, and not as if you were obligated. That's not where the money went. The next one is for, again, other birds. One is, again, here is the older turtle dove. The other is for the young pigeon. The next one is a collection box for money that is going to go for wood. And the Gemara, the Mishnah, and then the Gemara are going to tell us how if you wanted to donate any one of these things, there is a minimum requirement for the donation. So for wood, the minimum requirement is 2 pieces of wood. The next one is livona, frankincense. If you wanted to donate frankincense, you needed to give a kometz. A kometz is a handful. The Gemara in a minute, but I'll say it now. The Gemara says, whose handful, right? My hand is not the same as your hand. So the Gemara discusses maybe it has to be the largest Kohen's hand, or we say, no, you give your own handful. That is the minimum amount. The next one is you can donate gold. As we saw beforehand, there's a lot of gold in the temple. Many things were either plated in gold, covered in gold. So if you wanted to donate gold, there is a minimum donation, again, which is a dinar, a gold coin. And the last is really the last 6. There were 6 collection boxes for nidava. Nidava means, again, a voluntary offering. And the Gemara is going to say that this is when the altar was empty, meaning if it was a slow day in the temple, they would take money from these 6 collection boxes and buy sacrifices to put on the altar. Again, the concept is that we want the temple to reflect affluence, right? To show that the Jewish people will give and donate to the temple. It's a way of us to express our relationship with God in a physical way. And therefore, these collection boxes were very important because it was a way for the Jewish people to donate in various ways to the temple. So I'm going to continue now on the bottom of 18 and then onto the top of 19. The Gemara talks about again different boxes, and interestingly enough, at the top of 19, it says that there were collection boxes outside of the temple as well. Again, we just mentioned these 13 that are in the temple, but there were actually also collection boxes outside of the temple for those people who were impure. As just again a review, right? If someone is impure, they could not go up to the Temple Mount, and therefore there were collection boxes outside. For people who wanted to donate. And with that, we finish the 6th chapter of Masechet Shekalim. And we're going to continue on to the 7th chapter on Daf 19. The Mishnah says, it's very nice that we have all of these boxes. What happens if the Kohen comes into the room and sees some money on the floor? What do we do, right? Where did the money come from? So the Mishnah very meticulously gives us very different, many different examples of if the money is found here, it goes here. If the money is found there, it goes there. So let's go through it a little bit. So it says if the money was found between box 1 and 13. Now, if you look at this picture, how could there be money between 1 and 13? The Gemara is going to say that the Mishnah is trying to teach us that the boxes were actually in a circle, right? So not as this picture is depicting, but, or I guess if you can look at it in 3D, maybe one could say it was a circle, but the Gemara says it was actually in a circle, which means that 1 and 13 were next to each other. So the Mishnah says that if it was found between 1 and 13, then you give it, first of all, you always give it to the closer box, right? Obviously, if it's closer to one box, you put it into that box. And if it's equidistant, then you're going to put it, again, if it's between 1 and 13, 1 is the new shekel, 13 is the voluntary box, the nidava. So the Gemara says you put it into nidava. We're going to see why in a minute. What if it's between the box for the trees and the box for the frankincense? So then it should go into the box of the frankincense. What if it's between the two that are birds? It should go into the young pigeons. What if you, and then the Mishnah continues to another case, what if you have two piles of money? One is maaser money, it's tithing money. The other is regular money. What do? Then you put the money into your tithing money. So then the Gemara says there's a general rule. What's the general rule? Again, if it's closer to any one pile or box, it goes to the closer one. If it's even, then we go to the more stringent reality, right? So here, basically the Gemara is going to explain why the Mishnah ruled the way it did, how each one is more stringent or more lenient than the other. So again, the Gemara says it's very important to understand what does it mean more stringent, right? So again, between 1 and 13, 1 is the new shkalim that goes to many different sacrifices, but 13, the nidava, only goes to an olah sacrifice. So we're going to go, if it's between 1 and 13, we're going to put it in box 13 because that is more limited, more stringent, as you will. Okay, the next Mishnah on 19, since we're talking about money and not knowing where it goes, continues on this idea. What if you found money in front of the animal dealers, right? The people who are selling animals. So then the Mishnah says it's always considered tithing money, right? Maaser money. Why is that? We have learned this in the past. Maaser sheni was the idea that anybody in their home, if you had produce that you tithed, you would redeem it onto a coin. That coin you took to Jerusalem. When you got to Jerusalem, you would buy food with that money. So these animal dealers that are in Yerushalayim, in general, the money that they were seeing was generally tithed money, and therefore. You the money that you see there is assumed to be maaser money, and then you took that money and you bought a sacrifice, a shlamim sacrifice, which you would then bring to the temple, but you got to eat a lot of the meat from it. So again, you can have a nice barbecue with that money. What happens if money was found on the Temple Mount? How do we determine what that money is? So the Mishnah says that money found on the Temple Mount, even during the 3 festivals, we assume that they are chulin, meaning regular money, that they do not have any sanctity. However, and I'll explain to you why in a minute, if you found money on the streets of Jerusalem, then if it was during the year, we assume it's regular money. But if it was during the 3 festivals, we assume that it's maaser money. Again, the tithed money that, again, you have to do a certain thing with. The question is why. The Mishnah explains, and I thought, again, on one hand, it's just such a beautiful explanation. On the other hand, it also really teaches us what's going on during the time of the temple. So the Mishnah says that the streets of Jerusalem were swept every single day. Therefore, if you found money on the streets of Jerusalem, you would know that it was dropped today, because I know that it was swept every day. And therefore, if it was found today, the likelihood is that it was somebody who came to Jerusalem, and generally that money, especially during the holidays, was maaser money. However, the Temple Mount was not swept every day, and therefore the money you found today could be money that you found that was dropped, a few days ago or a week ago, and therefore we can't make any assumptions about it. What about meat? And I guess you would say, why is that an issue? Again, one wants to know, if I find some meat lying on the floor, is it sanctified? Is it not sanctified? How do I dispose of it? Again, I don't think the assumption is you're going to pick it up and eat it, unless it's, I don't know, on a plate or in a bowl. But I think the idea is we want to know, does this have any sanctity? So meat in the temple, if you found meat, if it was big limbs, then you know that it came from an olah sacrifice. An olah was the sacrifice that was completely burnt on the altar. We're going to talk about that at the end of our class today. If it was in little pieces, then you know that it was from a sin offering, because that was cut up in smaller pieces. Part of it went on the altar, the other part went to the priests. They ate from the meat of the sin offering, from the chatat. If you found meat in Jerusalem, you need to assume that it's from a shlamim. As I mentioned before, the sacrifice that is a shlamim, a part of it goes on the altar, but most of it, the person who brought it would take it out of the temple into Jerusalem and have a barbecue with that meat. So what do you do with it? Again, you cannot eat any of these meats. You need to wait a day, and then you need to burn it. We need to dispose of it, again, in the proper way, because it has sanctification. If you found meat out of Jerusalem, if it, again, is in pieces, we assume that it is not from a kosher animal. If it's in big pieces, we assume that it is a nevela, meaning an animal that died not from ritual slaughter, from shechita. If it's in small pieces, then you can assume that it is kosher meat, which is very interesting, but only if it's during the festival when there's a lot of meat, and in a city that is Jewish, meaning where we know that there are, I will say, either mostly or all Jews living in that city. And then you can assume that it's kosher. Of course, we'll say, oh no, how could that be? And the rest of the Gemara on this daf is going to discuss that. So let's continue to the Gemara on 19. And basically, it talks about a concept which is just important in general for kashrut, for the idea of knowing if, for dietary laws, the idea that if you don't uh, if you, I would say, if you haven't seen the meat the whole time, right? If you did not see the meat for a certain amount of time, we cannot assume that it is the same piece of meat unless there is some sort of mark, right? So if you know you left, you have a grill. This is very appropriate for this week for anybody who's in Israel on Yom HaAtzmaut, on Israel Independence Day. Many people go to the park and have a barbecue. Let's say you have a grill and you leave your hamburger and a piece of chicken on the grill, and then you leave. I don't know. You go play ball with your kids. When you come back, can you eat that meat? Right? Let's say nobody sat and watched it. So first of all, most of the people around you are Jewish. It's probably okay. But interestingly enough, the Gemara says if you can't identify it, and I was listening to a shir by somebody else who said that there are some people who will not eat that meat because you didn't see what happened. Maybe a bird came and picked up your hamburger and dropped a hamburger from somebody else. I know these are all crazy stories, but the idea is that the Gemara is trying to introduce the idea that if you took your mind off of it, meaning you didn't see it, you cannot assume that it is the same piece of meat. And therefore, we need to be very careful with the food that we eat. And from here, the Gemara mentions a very famous idea. In Hebrew, in the Gemara world, they call it Tesha Chanuyot, the idea of 9 stores, right? The case is brought that there are basically 10 stores. Think about it on Main Street in your city, right? So 9 of the stores are non-kosher, right? Let's say there are 10 butchers. 9 of them are non-kosher. 1 of them is kosher. Now I went into a store and I bought meat, and I come out of the store and I say, I was totally distracted. I don't remember if I went into the kosher store or the not kosher store. Is the meat that I bought kosher or not? So the Gemara says that that we assume because there are 9 stores that are not kosher, the majority, right, the probability that I went into one of those 9 is much higher than I went into one store that's kosher, and therefore I have to assume that the meat that I have is not kosher. Meaning, when I come out and I have the meat in my hand, I have to go with whatever is the majority. However, if I find a piece of meat on the floor, right on the street, then then sorry, 1 second. Sorry, wait, I just messed that up. Sorry, I take it back. If you went into the stores, then it's a 50-50 chance, right? I could have gone into this store. I could have gone into this store. I don't go by majority. I go by, there's a chance I could have walked into this store, and there's a chance I could have walked into that store. So when it was me going into the store, it's 50-50, and I have to assume it's not kosher. However, if I found the meat on the floor, then I can go by majority because 9 of the stores are not kosher. 1 store is. So then I can, again, I go by majority when I found it on the floor. And the Gemara, again, here flips the case as well. And again, if you find it outside, it goes by the majority. If you were the one who went into the store, it's 50-50. Anyway, I hope you understood that. If not, we will revisit this again. It does come up often in terms of how do we determine if we don't know if something is kosher or not. However, interestingly enough, the Gemara continues and says, we can't assume anything, basically. We never know, even if most of the people in this town are Jewish, maybe it was a non-Jew. There's a story about a butcher at the bottom of 19 that says that it was a kosher butcher, and then the non-Jew comes in to buy meat, and then you can say, he bought it from the kosher store, for sure it's kosher. And then the Gemara says, well, they asked the butcher, did you give him kosher meat? He said, no, I knew he was not Jewish, so I gave him non-kosher meat. So again, the top of 20, basically Rav says, if you haven't seen, if you do not know exactly where this meat came from, we cannot make any assumptions, and you should assume that it is not kosher. The top of 20 continues. Not only is this the same, is this true for wine? For meat, it is also true for wine. The same is also true for cheese. Different ideas of things that are found on the street. Can we assume that, or even my things, if I left them somewhere and then I come back, I cannot assume that the thing that's there is mine. Again, unless I have a certain sign that I know, right? I left it in a bag and I tied it with 3 knots. If I know that that's my bag, it's fine. But if I don't, then it becomes problematic. Okay, the next Mishnah on 20. What happens? Oh, I think I might have had some pictures for you. Did I have pictures for you? Oh, no, I don't have pictures yet. Okay, the Mishnah on 20. What happens, again, we're talking about finding things. What happens if you find a live animal walking around, right? If anybody is ever in Israel, if you drive either south or north of Jerusalem, it's very fertile area. There are a lot of shepherds who are walking around with their flock. What if you walk down the street and you see a sheep and there's nobody around, and you say, what do I do? So the Mishnah says that if you find an animal between Jerusalem and Bethlehem, Beit Lechem, again, that distance, but in a circumference, meaning in any direction, then you need to assume that maybe it was sanctified, or it was going to be a sacrifice. And therefore, if it's male, it's going to be an olah, again, a voluntary sacrifice. If it's female, we assume it's a shlamim. Again, the shlamim, the one that you get to eat as well. And if it's within 30 days of Pesach, then again, if it's male, we assume it's a Pesach, right? Because everybody's getting ready for Korban Pesach. This brings us back to the last Masechet. And interestingly enough, we know that there is a special commandment that if you find a lost item, you need to try and return it. So the Mishnah says that in the beginning, they used to force whoever was found these animals to bring it to Jerusalem. And not only that, but they had to, from their own money, bring the accompaniments for that sacrifice. People said, I don't want to have to go. I don't want to have to pay. So people stopped bringing the animals to the temple. And then, therefore, they made a decree that the money would actually be from public funds, so that people would pick up these animals and bring them back to the temple. So from here, the Mishnah continues and talks about 7 different decrees that the courts made in order to make, I guess I would say, life a little bit easier for the Jewish community. So the Mishnah talks about, again, if a non-Jew sends a sacrifice to the temple, again, every sacrifice comes with an accompaniment of wine, of oil, and flour. So if they would send it, great, but if they didn't, who's going to pay for it? So the courts, the Beit Din, decreed that it would come from communal funds. Again, I'm glad I still have this picture up, right? Communal funds, as we can see here from our collection boxes. The same with if a convert died and he was going to bring a sacrifice, again, communal funds would cover the expenses, again, because there's no other family member. What if the high priest, the Kohen Gadol, died and he needs to bring his mincha offering, his flour offering, what would they do? Originally, the money needed to come from the inheritors, the family, or the Mishnah says, or it came from communal funds. And the Gemara is going to talk more about this offering. What Also, right, salt and wood. The courts decreed that the salt, basically the leftover salt and wood that were in the temple, the priests were allowed to benefit from them, right? If there was leftover, or if there was a lot, they could use it. And then they also said that the ashes from the red heifer would not be, if you used it, would not be a violation. Me'ilah, remember we talked about the concept of misappropriating from the temple. So the courts decreed that that would not be a problem. And also that the birds, again, if there was something messed up with the bird sacrifices, the money to cover that, again, would come from communal funds. Since we're talking about all of these sacrifices, the Gemara continues on 20 to talk about these animals. Again, there's a disagreement. Remember, we talked about the sheep wandering. Does that sheep actually become the sacrifice, or do we sell it and use the money to buy a new sacrifice? That's the discussion in the Gemara on Daf 20. From here, the Gemara talks about the high priest, the Kohen Gadol, who dies. So just an introduction, the Kohen Gadol, the high priest, every day would bring a tenth of an ephah of flour, and this was separated into two mincha offerings, two grain offerings, one in the morning and one in the afternoon. There's a discussion here if he brought it all, it was put in a sanctified vessel, and then it was separated, meaning when he came in the morning, he sanctified everything for the day, and therefore in the afternoon, let's say he died in the middle of the day, could you bring that other half, even though he is no longer with us? Or does the family have to bring a new sacrifice? Or if they appointed a new high priest in the interim, how does he bring his sacrifice? Again, it's the afternoon, so only a half is needed, but it's not so nice to bring a half. And the Gemara is going to say basically he has to bring a whole. So let's just go through that. So the Gemara on 20 says that, again, as I mentioned, he would bring it whole and then split it. From here, since we're talking about this mincha offering, how did they make it? So the Gemara mentions that the verse in the Torah says tufine. Tufine means baked. Interestingly, there's a bakery in Jerusalem called Tufine, it comes from this verse. And what does it mean? It basically means that this offering needed to be baked and then and fried. And of course, since we're in the Gemara, there needs to be three different opinions. Is it baked and then fried? Is it fried and then baked? Or maybe it's baked and fried and baked. So that is the discussion at the bottom of 20. And again, the idea about this mincha offering, where the funds come from for this offering. Let's go on to 21. 21, again, we talk about bringing the mincha offering. It has to be brought whole. And the end of the chapter, again, talks about the ashes of the para aduma, the red heifer, and how people wouldn't use it and would use it, and that's why the courts made a decree. And with that, we finish the end of the 7th chapter. And don't worry, one more chapter, but really 1.5 more pages. We're still on 21. Since we're talking about things that we encounter I just realized I wonder if the order is moving from the inside out, right? We went from, money found in the temple, then meat found in the temple, then meat found outside, and money found outside. Then we have the animals wandering outside of Jerusalem. So I wonder if that's okay. That's just very interesting. Maybe here on 21, the new chapter starts with saliva. Now, those of you who have been learning Gemara with me for a little while, we talked about purity and impurity, right? Tum'ah and tahara. There are things that make people pure and impure. One of those things is the saliva of a person who is impure. If one comes in contact with that saliva, then it would make that vessel impure. So the Gemara says, what happens if, or the Mishnah actually says, what happens if you see saliva? It's found in Jerusalem. It's the Mishnah says, don't worry, you can assume that it's pure. Except for in the upper market. The Gemara is going to explain why. Then again, as I mentioned before, the idea of the Mishnah not only teaching us the laws, but giving us a feel of what it was to live in those times. So the Mishnah talks about the middle of the street versus the side of the street. Now here, don't think about our streets where we think of like the street where the cars go and the sidewalks where the people go. Think about it as the main road, and like the side of the road is not where people walk, right? You think about it as like the shoulder in a highway, right? You don't walk in the shoulder or you don't drive in the shoulder. It's where you pull over. So the Mishnah and the Gemara are going to say the middle of the road is going to be the majority of the people, and the shoulder of the road is going to be for the minority of people. So again, if you find this saliva during the year in the middle of the road in Jerusalem, you should assume that it is impure. If it's on the side of the road, it's pure. And then if it's during the festival, it's the opposite. Again, just to remind us that in the festival, most of the people walking around Jerusalem are going to be pure. They want to be able to go to the temple. During the year, again, there are people who are living in Jerusalem, not necessarily, it's not necessarily that the majority of the people walking in Jerusalem are pure during the year, says the Mishnah, which is very interesting. What about vessels? And I meant to get you a picture, but I forgot. After this, you can Google the mikvahs in the time of the temple. Right, we're very familiar of, or maybe some of us are familiar of what a mikvah looks like now. Generally, it's a pool of water. It's an area with water with steps leading down into it. In the time of the temple, there actually was, there were like, I guess I would say a big staircase with like a wall or a divider down the middle. And archaeologists recognize, and this is really from our Mishnah, that there was a down staircase and an up staircase, right? And it makes sense, right? Especially if you're going in Jerusalem where there are a lot of people. You want people, right? Again, I guess in America, right, people stay to the right when you're going down the stairs, but I don't think that happens all over. So here they wanted to make sure that going down was separate from going up. Why? The people going down are impure. The people coming up are pure. So too the vessels, right? So if a vessel was found on the down staircase, we would assume that it is impure. The vessel found on the up staircase is assumed to be pure. Again, giving us an idea of what it was like in those days to go into the mikvah. What about if you found a knife in Jerusalem? Now, those of you who have been following, this discussion was actually in Masechet Psachim, when we talked about how they slaughtered the Pesach and how they didn't break the bones, right? So if you found a knife around the time of Pesach, meaning specifically on the 14th, you can assume that it is pure or purified. If you found a cleaver, you could not assume that because you didn't need that for the Korban Pesach, right? Because you're not allowed to break the bones. again, assumptions and how we make those assumptions. The Gemara continues and explains that the upper market had non-Jews, and therefore you can assume that anything found in the upper market would be not pure or impure. From here, you get into a discussion again, as I mentioned, right? Who are the majority of people walking in Jerusalem? Are they pure or are they impure? The next Mishnah talks about talks about things that have become impure. So specifically meat, and did it become impure from a direct contact, right? Meaning, is it a primary source or from a secondary source? That would lead to different levels of tum'ah, of impurity. Then the Gemara, the Mishnah talks about the parochet, right? The curtains in the temple, and how if they would get impure, they would have to be put in the mikvah, and then they would be put up. But if it became impure from a primary source, right, then they would have to take it out of the temple. They would have to put it into the mikvah, and it would have to wait till that night to be put up again. So too, any new curtain that was put up, that would be also would have to be put on to into the mikvah. And the Gemara now then goes into a very detail about how the curtains were woven. They were woven with 72 layers, with 24 strings. It was so large. It was so expensive. It took 300 priests to put it into the mikvah. And from here, wait, before I get to that, I'll say it now, right? The Mishnah actually says, the Gemara says that that's really an exaggeration. The word is guzma. Guzma means an exaggeration, meaning, did it really take 300 people to put it into the mikvah? Maybe. Or maybe the Mishnah was saying it was really big and it was really expensive. But it's the Gemara says it's not to be taken literally. From here, there's a discussion of how big what the curtain looked like. You can see that it says in the Torah that it was rokem, meaning embroidered, but it was also maaseh choshev. Choshev means to like think about it, but it means that it was artistic. So what did that mean? Now we know that it was woven with a design, and here there's a machloket, of course. Was the design on both sides or only on one side, right? So you can see here there are 4 different options, right? Either it's one-sided and the other side is blank, or it is two-sided, but two-sided in the sense that it had the same picture on both sides, or maybe it was, right, again, one-sided, or that it was two-sided, and not only did it have a picture on both sides, but it was a different picture on both sides. Okay, from here, let me see if I have more pictures for you. Sorry, one second. Oh, okay. From here, our last Mishnah, or no, not our last Mishnah, second to last, talks about if meat became tameh, do you burn it inside or outside of the temple? And then on 22, there's the last Mishnah talks about the limbs of the Korban Tamid. Again, the Korban Tamid was brought every day, twice a day. And here's just a picture of what the altar looked like with the ramp. And the Mishnah describes that the limbs were set up on the ramp in order to be ready for the priests to put it up on the fire, which was up on the top. And then different sacrifices were placed on different places on the ramp. It was great because we learned this yesterday, and it was Rosh Chodesh yesterday, so I thought it was so nice because it talks about the Rosh Chodesh, right, the new moon, the sacrifice that was brought on the new moon. And From here, just the last point I wanted to make was a discussion about the nowadays, right? Nowadays, when we don't, as we saw in the 21 pages that we learned, Masechet Shekalim, the separation of the shekel was connected to the temple, as we've been discussing. The question is nowadays, if, let's say you say, oh, I was so inspired by learning this Masechet, I'm going to separate machatzit shekel. That is very problematic. As we mentioned, the coin becomes sanctified. Now, what happens if it gets lost and it gets mixed up with your other money? As we saw previously, it becomes very complicated. And the Gemara says, don't do this. Do not try this at home. Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakai, just one word about Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakai lived during the time of the destruction of the temple and afterwards, and he needed to help the community heal. We moved from a temple-centric religion to a religion that didn't have a temple, and we needed to deal with that. So Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakai, we're going to see throughout the Gemara, came up with different decrees to help the nation, I would say, mourn for the temple, but also figure out what did ritual look like now that there was no temple. And one of the things that he said was, do not separate these things because we don't know when the temple is going to come again. And therefore, we don't want things to get complicated, and therefore don't do it. And of course, our Gemara at the last daf discusses, well, what if I want to do it anyway? Does it work or not? And that is how our Gemara ends off. But again, it's not something that you should do. And with that, we finish Masechet Shekalim. So as we say, right, Hadran alach perek kol harokin, meaning we will return to you this last 8th chapter, uslika la Masechet Shekalim, and again, we will return to you Masechet Shekalim, and I really want to thank you all for joining me in this Masechet, and really, kol hakavod, I hope you have some drink or some treat to celebrate the end of this Masechet. If you don't, then please celebrate with your family and friends today, tomorrow, whenever works for you. But it is really an accomplishment. I know it was a short Masechet, but really it was, I would say, very intense Masechet. And now, today, actually, we started Masechet Yuma. So just in 1 or 2 minutes, Masechet Yuma is going to describe the events leading to and the day of Yom Kippur. And I really, first of all, it's one of my favorite Masechetot. It really changed the way I saw and the way I related to Yom Kippur. If I ask any of you, when I say Yom Kippur, what do you think about? I would imagine you would say fasting, praying, right? I'm always hungry, repentance. Those are very important themes, but we're missing the idea of what it was like in the time of the temple. It was a very intense day for the Kohen Gadol, for the high priest, and we're going to learn what he did. And the first Mishnah that we learned today says that they actually started preparing a week before. The Kohen would have to leave his home, and he basically moved in to the Temple Mount. And we're going to see, as we learn chronologically, how the high priest would prepare. And you're going to see sometimes he knew a lot, sometimes he knew very little, and the people around him needed to teach him what a goat looked like, what a sheep looked like, what the actual work that he needed to do. The day was very complicated, and we're going to go through all of the things that he did on that day. Bezrat Hashem, when we get to Yom Kippur, maybe we will have a temple, and Bezrat Hashem, we should have the temple and celebrate together. So I'm wishing all of you a Shavua Tov, And a really congratulations to everybody for finishing the Masechet. And next week we will start from the first daf. We will do the week of Masechet Yoma. So thank you very much for joining me, and see you next week, everyone.